The most immediate thing was that when I had resigned from teaching, I had a dog, Griffin, who was 11 at the time. And before my last day, he went through a health crisis that there's either nothing that we can do or we can throw a ton of money at this problem and try to save him. And I figured, the hell with it. Let's just use it and saved him because of my ability to work remotely and have like a greater income. I was able to keep him alive for 3 more years. Even student loans feels realistically achievable to pay off. Even the loans my mom took out for me, I know I can pay for now. It's the compound effect for sure.
In today's episode, we have Jason. Jason's a former teacher and now turned software engineer at 2U and edX, which is an online learning platform, and an alumni of Hack Reactor, which is a coding bootcamp. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, how's it going, Felix?
Yeah, it's going well. I'm excited to have you on. You had a very interesting journey to get here. You not only changed careers, but you moved around a lot. And you grew up in California, studied English and mathematics in New York, and eventually
Yeah.
moved to Texas, where you became a sixth grade science teacher. So tell us more about that journey, like what your life was like before becoming a software engineer.
When I finished college in New York with English and mathematics, I chose those two just because I never really knew if I preferred the creativity of English or if I preferred the logic of mathematics. But in Texas, I was in fact starting off as like a tutor in mathematics and found my way into tutoring in middle schools and elementary schools across all subjects. And for the last few years of my teaching career, I was a sixth grade science teacher while also attempting to host a coding club for my students using Scratch. Unfortunately, I had no coding knowledge to begin with. I just knew that these students really wanted a room and some computers to start learning themselves. In some ways, I grew up without knowing anything about programming or what software engineering was. And it wasn't until college that I learned there was a computer science program. I felt that field was so out of my range that I stuck with what I enjoyed and knew already.
That's a good point about how I knew that was a career path, but I didn't know anyone that did it.
Mhm.
So it still seemed very far away and not very accessible. And I think that's awesome of you as a teacher to you didn't have the background, maybe not necessarily like the training for it, but you
Right.
knew that other kids had interest in it and you wanted to help them pursue it. So that was the experience you offered to your students, but then you decided that you wanted to take this up yourself. And before you could make this transition to becoming a software engineer, you had to leave the teaching career
Yeah.
behind. Tell us more about that decision. How did you decide to change careers?
It was as most people, the pandemic changes one's life. And in my case, in Texas, it was at some point in the fall of 2020 that the governor required all teachers to return to campus. I, as a sixth grade scientist, did not think that was a great idea. So I respectfully resigned from that position. From October to January, I was doing some online tutor management and creating some math materials for video lessons. And then I had, of course, attempted like the CS50 Harvard course for a couple of weeks and failed miserably because I still had no idea how to do anything. But I had a roommate who didn't tell anyone that they were going through a 3-month coding bootcamp program. But one day they come out in some week in January and tell us, I just finished this program and I now have a job making a great amount of money. In my head, it was twice as much as what I was making as a teacher. Having seen them go through that and knowing that they also did not have the background of computer science or software engineering, I decided to go for it myself.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see others doing this. It's one thing to see them from afar, it's another to know someone you live with has
Mhm.
been able to accomplish this.
Yeah.
How confident did you feel about it? Did you have some doubts on whether this will work for you?
At various stages, I did. When I with Hack Reactor, in order to get into their 13-week program, you needed to have a foundational knowledge of JavaScript. They would give you free course material to then take their entrance exam. During that time, in a course of 5 weeks, I thankfully that material was really basic and able to just like build on top of itself. And so it wasn't until maybe the second half of the prep material that I started to doubt myself again. But at that time, hosting a weekly or twice a week call where I would let people know, hey, I'm studying for this entrance exam. If you're doing the same thing, hop into this call. I'll be here for an hour. And this is how I learn from others who are slightly ahead of me, say by a week or 2 weeks, or they already attempted the exam and failed.
The These were other people that were going to be in your cohort, or how did you find this community?
That's true. Hack Reactor used to have a Slack community for people who are trying to get in. And honestly, it was like a very dead server, but I managed to find a handful of people that way. And so over the course of 5 weeks, I managed to learn enough on my own and from them to then take the exam and pass. And that was the first hurdle.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that your roommate did this all in secrecy. Did
Yeah.
you take the same approach? Did you how much did you announce to the world that you made this leap?
I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my family even. And it wasn't until I had finished the program and graduation ceremony was coming that I then let my family know, hey, I've been in this program for a few months now and I'm graduating from it. Here's the Zoom link. Come on by if you can. And then once I received my first job, that's when I then was much more comfortable with letting the rest of the world know through social media and LinkedIn.
Yeah, say more about this. Like, what made you decide to kind of do it privately?
I think that it was two parts. One part of the fear of having people root for me and then suddenly not being able to succeed, which it happens with everything that we strive for, right? The second was that I was afraid of giving up too soon, kind of like the idea of when I bought a skateboard during the pandemic and I skated for 2 weeks and then I never touched the board again, and I didn't want to give off the impression that like, hey, I'm skateboarding now. Similarly with this, I didn't want to give off the impression that I was now a programmer until I got my first job.
Yeah, I've heard about this. A lot of people will say if you want to make a big change, public
Mhm,
accountability is important. I've always kind of heard that messaging, but I'm actually more in your camp. Sometimes I believe that kind of a big announcement adds like unnecessary stress.
mhm.
If you already have the drive to get this done, like is not to me is not required. It'd be one thing if like you couldn't motivate yourself at all. Maybe public accountability would be helpful. For me, it'd be unnecessary stress.
Yeah.
And then I've heard this other, I'm not sure if it's study or whatnot about how sometimes when you talk about the things you want to accomplish, it takes away the
Huh. Yeah.
dopamine from it, or it
Yeah.
gives you rather dopamine from, oh, I'm already a software engineer. And that can kind of take away from some of the drive. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that, like, doing things in private. To me, I always prefer that approach, not only because of the things I just listed, but then also in my opinion, motivations become less tainted
Yeah.
by the expectations of others. At least for me, I'm easily influenced by a lot of expectations from other people. So I think keeping things private has always been helpful in that way.
I like that aspect of it. And to touch on the idea of accountability, I still found a way to be held accountable. And that was actually through the meetings that I would host, knowing there's someone who's going to pop in next week. And we both agreed the week before that we were going to be working on some task that we both needed to get done. And that form of accountability was from someone who knew what I was doing and understood what I was trying to do versus the accountability from outside in which no one
Mm,
really knows what this entails.
that's a great point. That they're in your shoes. They
Yeah.
understand the kind of stress that's involved in the work. So once you have gone through this program, you made this announcement. How did your family and friends react to this news?
Really positively, I think that what ended up happening was my mom mentioned to friends and family that I went through this boot camp and became a software engineer. So occasionally I would talk to different friends and family about my journey. It, I think I became the person, maybe the first person for others in which they know a software engineer that I didn't have before. And so I was eager to share what I had to go through. I still do that even with friends who occasionally like reach out to me and we haven't talked in years and they want to know like how I got to where I am now.
That's amazing. So you had accountability partners along the way, but did you also have any mentors, anyone that in the program or that were working software engineers that helped you along the way?
The roommate who had already gone through the program didn't necessarily help me on every task. I'm thankful that I couldn't go to them to help me with everything. They let me go through the suffering that is the coding boot camp. Just having the affirmation that yeah, this is really hard. I also went through that difficult part of the boot camp helped me. After graduating, Hack Reactor used to have a program called Telegraph Track, which is for underrepresented people in tech who then get the opportunity to receive a mentor who volunteers as you go through your job hunting journey. I got this guy, Daniel De La Rosa, who had been a Hack Reactor alum for some time. And he was a great help in getting me to focus on certain skills and tasks to get my foot in the door with companies and to be prepared for those interviews.
Yeah, let's talk about that. After the boot camp, I think a lot of people get attracted to boot camps because they think
Mhm.
afterwards you can get this high paying job and it's pretty much guaranteed. You came out of the boot camp, it sounded like the beginning of the big hiring surge in
Yeah.
tech, but the process still took you 3 months
Yeah.
to land that first job. And we'll talk a bit later about how the hiring environment has changed since then and what you recommend today. But tell us more about that experience. It's 3 months after making this big leap, paying the money, going full time to this, and then weeks go by and you
Yeah.
don't have a job. What was your emotional state going through this?
I think that as everyone does experience when they come out of a boot camp is you have no real sense of what to focus on. Some people would say create a portfolio or create more projects or find open source material or do volunteer or leak code, DSA, data structures and algorithms. And so what I decided on was I needed to get myself to the technical interview with any company. How do I get there and what do I need to be prepared for that was a few things. It was having the resume, of course, and applying to companies, but also figuring out how to get referrals to those companies. As I had learned that in fact with my former roommate, the company that they were at, statistically, it was something like 80% of all new hires were referred. And so if I wanted to get my foot in the door and be in a smaller pool of candidates, I had to get a referral. So I learned how to find people on LinkedIn to message, usually software engineers or recruiters, and let them know that I applied to their company or that I was interested in their company and would love to chat. Over those 3 months, I went from a 3 paragraph message to send out to people, and I reduced it to 3 sentences, which was my name, why I'm reaching out, and if they would have time to chat sometime next week about the culture of the company and the position, if they have any knowledge about it. I use that for LinkedIn and on Slack as well, which hilariously, I've learned that a lot of people don't realize how you can use Slack to find job applications. I tell people to look for different tech communities that are for certain demographics. I found Equeria, which is Latinx in tech. But there's also things like Blacks in Technology, Out in Tech, Women Who Code, which I believe there's also like tech ladies or ladies in tech. So there's all these different affiliates in which people will post their company's openings and they'll say, reach out to me if you need a referral, if you have any questions. And that's how I ended up with a lot of my interviews. In fact, that was how I got my first job. A recruiter from Code for America posted in Tequeria, and I reached out to her. 5 minutes later, she responded and said, hey, yeah, let's set up an interview today. That is something I still do, even when I'm job hunting to this day.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I never considered because if you think about Slack, at least in my use cases, like Slacker is people that you already know for the most part. So like they're already part of your network, but I've never seen Slack used as like a way to expand your
Right.
network, which is what you did. Tell us more about this experience. So you were responding to messages on Slack. You spoke to a recruiter through there that recruited for Code for America.
Hmm.
They scheduled an interview like that. Was that same day or when
Yeah.
was the interview and like what was that interview process like?
Yeah, it was great. Whenever I look back at the screenshot, because I sometimes present my work or my job process, it was something like I messaged at 9:30 and she responded at 9:35 and our recruiter like official call was at 2:30. So from there, we had a great talk and she instantly let me know that I would be getting an email to schedule a technical. And the great thing about Code for America was that I had already been trying to study data structures and algorithms using Leak Code and any other materials to learn data structures, which is really hard to do. It's not something that you can necessarily learn in a week. People in college will take it for a whole semester, right? And so, fortunately, with Code for America, their interview process, especially their technicals, were more focused on paired programming. And so, the software engineer will come into call with me, and They'll share their screen, their IDE, and they'll ask me to code along with them, either to tell them what to do next to solve a problem, which could be like a very easy leak code problem, or in a follow up interview, it was here's our web page. We need to fix some buttons and make the test pass. Help me along with that. And I was able to really do that because in Hack Reactor there was so much paired programming involved in the 13-week program, where the first 6 weeks you're paired with a different person in your cohort to work on the same task together and make sure that you're both understanding what the solution is. So honestly, that helped me the most.
Yeah, I'm a fan of these more realistic interviews. I think the hiring process has a long time to go before it becomes less like leak code and more like realistic
Yeah.
work. Well, I'm hopeful that we'll get there. What's interesting about your story is that it took a long time, 3 months. It feels like a long time when you're in
Hmm.
it to land a job, but a lot of it was kind of like refining your techniques until you
Yes.
figured out like what worked, and all of a sudden it kind of just took off.
Yeah.
But tell us more about like so you went through the interview, yeah, you went through the rounds, and then how long after the interview before you got the offer?
So I with that company, I applied around September 15th. So I'd already had about a month and a half of practicing how to reach out to people. And that's how I ended up with a really small message to the recruiter. From September 15th, I then get my offer letter on October 31st, which is exactly 1 year from my last day of teaching. So in a whole year, I'd gone from knowing zero code to knowing enough to then get that offer. And then I started 2 weeks later.
That's amazing. What did you remember what it felt like when I'm assuming it was an email or something that came in with the offer with the numbers and like your role and like once you accept, you actually are now a working software engineer. Like what was that experience? What did that feel like?
Terror, honestly, because then it meant, oh God, someone actually believes in me enough to do the work, but do they really know how much I know? And in fact, with this company, I was not going to be using any of the tech stack that I learned from Hack Reactor. So no JavaScript, no React. It was Ruby and Ruby on Rails, and I knew that that was just going to be another hurdle. But still, I was so excited. Like I made it, and I had actually told myself that my goal was to get a job before October 31st because in November and December, a lot of companies are on holiday. The interview process is so much slower and financially, I just was not going to be able to make that. And so I knew it had to be by that day. And I was fortunate enough to get it on that day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might think that there'll be a lot of elation involved and like excitement, but I found that usually when you go through an experience like this, it's almost like a relief. Like, oh,
Yeah.
fun. Like it's like I mean, obviously there's accomplishments involved, but usually yeah, there's some kind of pressing deadline. You can't be
Hmm.
job hunting forever, right?
No.
So yeah, that makes sense. So you basically didn't work in like a job for a year or at least in like a full-time job.
Right.
Can you talk about the transition back into work after kind of being out for a year? I mean, obviously you're studying and all that stuff, but like this is now you're back in some more regimented work environment. Like what was that transition like?
I will say it felt weird at first because I was coming in the middle of November when in fact a week later we would all go on holiday for a week and in December we're still slowing down and have another 2 weeks off. And so maybe that contributed to the sort of comfortableness that came with starting at this company. That it included a lot of onboarding, a lot of documentation, and it was so unlike teaching for me because I was working remotely for one, but two, there was a different sense of what I was contributing to, which is these tickets in which you then have to code out the solution or solve a bug and present it to your team to get approval for it, right? And so I think the hard thing about it was that there's real no way to prepare for what this environment's going to be, especially because every company has a different process and a series of steps. So even Hack Reactor as a bootcamp just cannot realistically prepare you for what your first couple of months are going to be like, or what you're going to be measured on in terms of your output. It was still definitely a lot better than teaching in terms of less children screaming, but it was yeah, it was hard.
Yeah, so obviously a big adjustment, but then you also had another kind of surprise twist in your life, which is that you discovered that you have ADHD
Oh, yeah.
after completing
Mm.
the boot camp.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how you discovered that. But before we
Oh,
get to
God.
that, what is it like for someone that is learning to be a software engineer, learning something brand new, and then working as a software engineer with ADHD? How's the experience different?
Basically, what was so funny was in the boot camp, I had a couple of cohort mates who have ADHD and they were taking medication. They were just focused and honed in on it. And the whole time I'd always been struggling with was trying to get the work done. That's where the accountability came into play at the very beginning of me learning is because I needed this pressure of someone expecting something from me. While working at that company for that year, it was very difficult, both because of having to learn a new framework and language, but also because I didn't know at the time that I had ADHD. Instead, I thought it was just imposter syndrome, that sense of moving too slowly. I'm not learning fast enough. I'm always needing to ask for help. A ticket for me would take 2 weeks to finish when for someone else it would probably take 2 days. At the end of that first year, thankfully, I'd been given a mentor in the company, which helped a lot with affirming for me that not only is this work difficult, but the environment that I was working in was not equipped to help someone in their first year. As other engineers at that company started as interns, they struggled for several years until they got to a point where they were feeling good. But I don't think that's the norm for most companies. If you have a sense of what an entry level engineer needs support in as a team or as a company, you can help them lift off in 6 to 9 months. It wasn't until after I transitioned to a new company at 2U and NetX where I eventually went through therapy to overcome imposter syndrome. And once I got over that, I still was struggling with getting work done. I was noticing that I was running away from the task itself, even if it was to write up documentation. And that's when I realized, oh, there's actually nothing wrong, but I'm still running away. So this must be an attention issue. And that's how I then got consultation from my therapist and psychiatrist.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of people, might be listeners out there that undiagnosed
Yeah.
ADHD. And I think it's important to talk about because you had mentioned that there's probably a lot of like self blame and shame
Yeah.
about your perceived performance and like
Completely.
that I should be doing better or like why am I not getting things done sooner? Why am I not focusing on the task at hand?
Yeah.
So I think yeah, it's important to talk about that. Sometimes it's not just the imposter syndrome. Sometimes it's something else that you need to tackle differently.
Yeah.
Other than obviously getting professional help here, do you remember any specific ways that you found to navigate on your own, like while you're trying to kind of, deal with this?
Man, no, I think that I dealt with it the same way that I'd been dealing with it when I was a teacher and when I was in college, in which I procrastinated like hell and then I missed the deadline and then I eventually get the work done. And it's so much of a different world now having the support and the medication to actually just focus on the task in front of me and not walk away from it. So for my whole life, I didn't know how to navigate because I didn't know that that was. I just figured this is how I am, and I know that I need to be more focused, or I know that I need to get this work done, but something is just causing me to step away.
Yeah, I think the tricky thing too is that the symptoms can be caused by completely different, like as
Hmm.
root causes, right?
Yeah,
I think like the procrastination sometimes is associated with like burnout
yeah,
and that you just can't focus. But that might be different than you can't treat that the same way that you might treat ADHD. So I think the kind of message that I'm trying to put out there is that, before you kind of go on this like self blame journey that you constantly blame yourself for things. Consider that maybe you haven't gotten the help that you need for this
right.
specific reason. So I just could be something you might not be
Yeah.
ADHD, might be something else. But the point is like it doesn't help to kind of blame yourself throughout that experience.
I completely agree. It's and to extend that further, it doesn't even have to be ADHD. As you said, it could be any type of learning disability that you just were never aware of. But once you become aware of it, then you have such a greater sense of who you are and how you learn. And what it comes down to is if you want to even learn something for the first time, like programming, you have to learn how to learn again, especially if you've been away from education for years or a decade or two. And you have to kind of find that part of yourself again.
Yeah, and I think during this transformation for you too, it sounds like it's been very empowering for you. And so this
Mhm.
transition into tech, into becoming a software engineer, has allowed you to take care of your not just yourself, but also you mentioned to us like your family in ways that you that weren't wasn't possible as a
Yeah.
teacher. Can you tell us more about that? Like how has your life changed besides the new career, but how has it changed outside of just the career itself?
Yeah, I think that the most immediate thing was that when I had resigned from teaching, I had a dog, Griffin, who was 11 at the time, and before my last day, he went through a health crisis, and his lung and his heart was starting to fail. And then the vet explained that there's either nothing that we can do, or we can throw a ton of money at this problem and try to save him. And I figured, the hell with it. Like I've saved up this money for when I resign. Let's just use it and saved him. And then from there, because of my ability to work remotely and to have like a greater income, I was able to keep him alive for 3 more years. And that's like crazy. Of course, like it amounted to a lot of bills, but there was just no way I would have been able to have even done that or like give him the life that he wanted for that period of time afterwards. And so from there, that's the immediate thing. Secondly, I was able to move from Texas to back to San Diego in California, which is a very expensive city, and yet I was able to live fairly comfortably. And it's just I've reached a point where even student loans feels realistically achievable to pay off, and I know how long it'll take and how much that comes out of my paycheck, but it's even the loans that, like, my mom took out for me that I know that I can pay for now, that she doesn't have to pay for, which, saves $600 a month, and that amounts to a lot, so, yeah, it's the compound effect for sure.
Yeah, it's I think because you're so close to this to your transformation where you know what you remember what life was like before and then now what it's like after. I think it's really cool to see how grateful you are for having all these things because like yeah, in reality is like a lot of times people don't have these options. I mean, let
Right,
alone like the best option. A lot of people don't have options at all. So
right.
I think that's one of the big things about a career path that's more of these opportunities allows for is like just beyond just the job is being better obviously has a huge impact on your life. You'll be able to take care of your family. I think it's probably the most rewarding part about that journey that you went on.
Yeah,
So let's talk about what you've been doing basically to kind of give back from this experience. So you mentioned to us that you're now mentoring others that are going through this approach of going through boot camp, coming out of it and trying to get a job. And they probably want a job for a lot of same reasons that
yeah,
you and I wanted one when we first came out. Like, you have like bills to pay or you want the more of the flexibility, you want to change your life in all these different ways. But one thing you told me was that, yeah, even though you went through this experience like what 4-ish years ago, the market is different
mhm,
today and your advice is going to be different if you spoke to someone from 4 years ago versus today. So
right.
tell us more about like what has changed, like maybe what you would do now that's different than the kind of general advice people would typically give for finding your first job.
My advice, for one, the thing that I always try to emphasize with anyone that I talk to and mentors, whoever you end up talking to, or the number of people you talk to, we're all going to have different advice and different things to suggest. And so part of my advice is to experiment with a whole job search. But specifically, what I've told the people that I mentor and talk to is your goal first and foremost is to get a phone call with a recruiter. And then the thing that immediately happens afterwards is the technical interview. And so, in order to get the recruiter phone call, you need essentially to do two things, which is one, have a really strong resume. And most people going through boot camp will be forced to go through a resume workshop with their career services. And that may or may not be good enough. But in order for you to know that, you need to do step two, which is to reach out to people. You should not just be relying on the quick apply button at LinkedIn to submit 500 applications. You should be that is not even the bare minimum. The bare minimum is you apply and you find people on LinkedIn who are software engineers, preferably like closer to your experience. And for fun, if you can, reach out to a recruiter. Ideally, 2 to 5 people per company, and message them saying, a very quick message of, and I'll just say it. It's, hi, my name is Jason. I'm a software engineer. I saw that you work at X company, and I recently applied for X position. If you have time later on this week or next week, I'd love to chat about the culture of the company or your experience there. Looking forward to hearing from you. And that's my message, and I send that out to 3 to 5 people per company. Sure, it takes some time. Realistically, you can do this in 5 minutes, finding the application and reaching out. And if you do that enough times, eventually someone will agree to talk to you, and eventually, ideally, they can give you feedback on even your resume, in which that is what you can then use to fix up your resume and hone it and experiment until somebody is willing to then refer you, and that's going to get you so much closer to that first phone call than just applying 1,000 times and not hearing from anyone. And this approach works again with Slack if you're someone who is able to join a certain affiliate or even like regionally. If you live in a major city or would want to work in a major city, those groups exist as well. And from that, in parallel, you should be studying for the technical interview, which is data structures and algorithms. And if you're given like front end experience, then you should be practicing that front end experience as well. For that resource, I would recommend something like greatfrontend.com just because they do a great job at giving you these technical problems in a browser setting to use HTML, CSS, and whatever framework you've learned. And by doing those two things, eventually when you get the phone call, then you'll at least be more prepared technically than you were when you graduated from your boot camp.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm hearing about the actual job search part and networking part is that I've heard this from others too, is that you actually don't have to do that much to stand out. And you don't really need to stand out that much either. You just got to kind of stand out a bit and put a little more effort
Yeah.
into the outreach.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's enough because most people don't, right? Because the
Most.
if the easy apply button is there or whatever it's called, like people are going to click
Mhm.
on it, and the person that goes above and beyond. Again, when I say above and beyond, I'm not saying anything crazy. It's like
Right.
just what you said was not. I mean, you can probably take word for word, like the script that obviously I was changing the name, but word for
Yeah.
word, the script that you just gave is going to make a big difference. And the other thing is that once you do that, like you kind of have to. A lot of people think, okay, the boot camp is over, or I graduated from school, and now I can kind of take it easy during this
Yeah.
period, but you kind of have to apply the same rigor that you used when you were going through the boot camp or when you were studying to
Totally.
treat it as like a full-time job. So I think those are all kind of great pieces of advice that you provided. So I want to say, thank you so much, Jason, for coming on and sharing your journey. It's been very inspiring journey that you provided and all the advice and experience that you shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Felix.